accused of spying after forming close ties with Prince Andrew. Yang Tengbo, who has been banned from the UK, has denied the accusations and says he hasn't done anything unlawful. Isabel Hilton, founder of the China Dialogue Trust, told LBC the UK does need to deal with China but has to draw lines.
It has to set limits on Chinese operations that are detrimental to British values, British democracy, British way of life. And that, I think, has become much more acute since Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin became best friends.
At least 3 people are dead and 6 wounded after a shooting at a school in the US state of Wisconsin. It happened in the capital, Madison. The shooter is among those dead. Lawyers for Lucy Letby say they'll make a new attempt to challenge her convictions after an expert witness changed his mind. Mark MacDonald claims evidence from the main witness for the prosecution, Dr. Dewey Evans, is not reliable. And Royal Mail's takeover by a Czech billionaire has been approved by the government. The deal, worth £5.3 billion, would still give the UK a golden share, meaning ministers would have to approve major decisions. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 38 points at 82.62. The pound buys $1.26 and €1.20. LBC weather, rain lingering in North Scotland tonight, also moving into Northern Ireland at times, and a low of 1 degree. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Just with reference to our last hour, Lynn texts to say, I bought some lovely Christmas tinsel from John Lewis, made in Wales, as should we all, if you like tinsel. Now, it's Monday's Cross Question. Joining me on the panel, to my left, Baroness Angela Smith, Labour peer, who's leader of the House of Lords. Next to her, her Conservative colleague in the House of Lords, Lord James Bethell. Matt Wrack is here to my right, General Secretary of the Fire Brigades Union, and next to him, Scarlett Maguire, Director of JL Partners, who do lots of very good opinion polling, don't you? We'll talk maybe a little bit about that in a moment. So we've got lots of questions lined up. We can have some more. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can WhatsApp us on that number, text 84850, and you can, of course, watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Scott in West Hampstead has our first question. Scott asks a lot of questions, and the reason we have him on so much is because they're often very good. And here's another one. Should Britain's dealings with China be a bit more hawkish, like the US's relationship with China is? Or should Britain's dealings with China be more diplomatic and much less confrontational? Scarlett Maguire, I don't know if off the top of your head you've got any polling figures on this. You do. I knew you would. Fantastic. I mean, what is our attitude as a country to China?
It's not very friendly, so only 13% of people have a favourable view. That compares to about 75% of people that have an unfavourable view.
That's quite a big gap.
It's a huge gap. Yeah, it's a huge gap. And only 1 in 10 people consider China to be a friend or an ally. And you even get, which is quite rare, more than half of people say they would back sanctions on China, even if that meant there were economically bad consequences at home. So, I mean, it's quite telling, I think, that the British public is actually pretty hawkish already.
So when Keir Starmer seems to indicate that he wants to pivot our policy towards China to be something more friendly, that's not going to go down well with the electorate.
I think it depends. It's still an issue of relatively low salience. So when you ask people what they care about, foreign policy often comes down very low anyway. And then China, I think, would be even lower on that scale, even when you start looking into foreign policy. But I do think it is the sort of thing to be wary about, not least because I'm sure you'll be talking about this with the other panellists, but the fact that we'd now be quite out of step with America, for example. But it is the sort of thing that I think could go down badly. But at the moment, it's actually more in the territory of people that I think don't think about it that much. But when they do, they feel quite hostile to China.
Matt Wrack, I'm trying to think of a link between China and the Fire Brigades Union. All I can think of is Chinese lanterns.
Chinese lanterns, yes. There's been campaigns for fire safety around Chinese lanterns. No, look, I think where trade unions have intervened in relation to China is about trade union rights. There are big discussions in the trade union movement about what our relationship with trade unions elsewhere in the world are. Chinese trade unions generally are very state-controlled, and the question of how workers have the freedom to organise in China is a big thing that the trade unions need to take up. It's equally the question about democratic rights more broadly in China. So I'm not going to give advice to the British state on what its policy should be, but I think as a trade unionist, I support building links with. I don't think my enemies are ordinary Chinese people doing firefighters' work, for example, in China, and we would want to build friendly relationships with them, and that's a way of making progress more generally in the world.
Actually, that's an interesting thing. Do you often go on visits to other countries and see how their firefighters operate and the systems that they use compared to what we have in this country?
We do. Not in China, actually. We have had some links in terms of some similar debates with. We've had some correspondence with firefighters in Russia, but generally our links are with North America, Australasia, and Western and now Central Europe. So yeah, we have a lot of work of. We're doing the same job, and we're often facing similar challenges such as climate change, extreme weather events, and how we deal with that is something that firefighters should cooperate on, and our unions do cooperate, and we would want to cooperate with organisations representing Chinese firefighters as well in that regard, and but being aware of some of the pressures from the Chinese state in relation to that.
Angela Smith, you sit in the cabinet. I know you're not going to give us any cabinet secrets. But,
you live in hope, don't you?
No, well, I don't really know. But is this something that you discuss around the cabinet table about how our policy should change or maybe not change towards a country like China?
I can't tell you about cabinet discussions, but I think you just have to look at a pragmatic approach. And I think we would want to have a better relationship with China, but you have to challenge as well. So where you can cooperate, look for cooperation. But also you can't not challenge if you think something is wrong, and you have to have that challenge relationship as well. So I think when David Lammy and Keir Starmer have gone to China, they've been very clear on this. But China's place in the world these days is very different to it was many years ago. And we talked about the American relationship with China. Remember, it was Nixon that went to China to try and build relationships at a time when it was really hostile. So I think the news we've seen today and over the weekend throws it into sharp focus. But I think it's a challenge. You've got to have a strategic approach to this and see what's in the best interests of Britain.
But when you saw, for example, at the G20, when Keir Starmer had a sit-down meeting with President Xi, a lot of the headlines that came out of that was, oh, well, he's being sycophantic to the Chinese. I mean, you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. If you don't engage with a country that, whatever its flaws may be, and however authoritarian it might be, it's got to be in Britain's interest to have a relationship.
There's got to be engagement, but how you engage is really important. Now, the first issue, and that was shown on TV when they had that meeting, was Keir raising the issue of a political prisoner, as we saw it, Jimmy Lai in prison in China, and that was raised at that meeting. So you do challenge where you have to, but there's also room for cooperation when it is in our interest to do. But not to engage, I think we'd be really seriously criticised if the British government didn't engage with China at all.
James?
I think the rhetoric is one thing. What we do is, I think, more important. Where the British public, I think, are confused is why do we let the Chinese come to the UK, buy our companies, walk through the corridors of power and steal our intellectual property. But Brits, when they go to China, don't have freedom of movement, can't buy companies in the same way, and are kept out of the system. It's just not fair, and it's not done on an equal basis. So I'm less interested in the diplomacy side of things. I'm more interested in trying to have a more equal relationship that is good for our businesses and is also...
But how can that be when you're dealing with the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, that's why I'm a hawk, because ultimately they are moving into a more autocratic mindset. I was really hopeful 15 years ago that we were going to be partners and working together, and that economic prosperity would lead to democracy and an opening up of the society. But it hasn't worked out that way. And President Xi is consolidating his power. The Communist Party is getting tougher and tougher. The west of China really hasn't liberalised. They haven't let out the Uyghurs and into being free people. It's getting tougher and tougher in China. I've got a lot of cousins in China. My wife's Chinese, we hear from them really tough stories about the social oppression there.
You were health minister during COVID. Did you have, I don't know whether you personally or the department had contact with their Chinese...
No, famously. They didn't tell us a thing.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at, because cooperation is a two-way street, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm quite burnt by that. We were trying to find out what was going on, and they lied to us all the way through. They didn't give us the tip-off it was coming our way. When they did, they didn't give us the data on it. They said that it was non-infectious. Clearly it was. And they ended up selling us a lot of kit and making a lot of money. But in terms of scientific collaboration, which is normally very, very free-moving, I feel that we were let down badly by a country that was meant to be our partner.
What do you make of that, Angela? Because that is a warning, isn't it?
Oh, it is, absolutely. And that's something I think that the whole world was looking at as well. I do wonder why we were buying kit from them when we were having such a difficult time. They're the only ones who were producing it. Well, there's a lesson there for us as well in terms of preparation, isn't there? But, it is this whole idea we can't just shut our eyes and walk away. We have to engage. How we engage is the important thing here, I think, and that's what I think the British public would expect of us, to put British interests first at all times.
I think just going on COVID, I think there was a complete lack of transparency from the British government, and lots of people are very critical of how the British government handled COVID in terms of not keeping the general public informed and not taking our health and safety seriously.
I'm not sure about that. We published.
Well, I am sure.
We published everything we could. I mean, in some ways, we published absolutely so much that people were drowning in data, and maybe it was confusing, but I don't think that there were secrets or data hidden.
Our problem was really that we weren't prepared enough, and we'd actually stopped preparations that had been in place before, which made it much harder for us to recover from COVID, both health-wise and also business-wise.
I'd say that we were definitely prepared for the wrong epidemic, and our doctrine was...
But that's about planning, isn't it? Planning and
horizon
scanning.
Let's bring in a follow-up question from James in Hitchin, who says, how should universities screen overseas academics and students for pernicious intent without turning the situation into a persecution of foreigners? You could widen that out to look at Chinese business people. I mean, given this, Mr. Yang Tenbo, who's we now know the identity of, the guy in the news over the past few days. And of course, Chinese students are so important to many of our universities, aren't they, Scarlett?
Yeah, they're incredibly important, and I think it's a good question, because I remember just from my time at university, which wasn't that long ago, there were many Chinese students, there were lots of international students generally, but I was quite shocked, not even just at the lack of screening, but how they would be completely left to their own devices. A lot of them didn't switch on to UK time zone; they were still on Beijing time, and so they'd be up. Yeah, no, it was really bizarre. So they were still keeping 8 hours ahead of us, and which meant they were up at all sorts of funny times. You could see them in the JTRs. You sort of maybe got back from a night out or whatever, but no, so it's very bizarre. But exactly. But also the university didn't seem that fussed about that either. And I do think there is a question about universities I think there's quite a lot of them just take the international money without thinking of the consequences. Yes, they might be up to no good, but also even just for the students' own sake, it feels like they wash their hands of any responsibility of that.
Yeah, and the interventions that come from the Chinese embassy, their representatives on campus, and from their security teams on campus worry the hell out of me. The idea that the Communist Party of China try to interfere on debates in British universities and we let them do that is quite chilling to me, because they're meant to be the spaces that are the most free and the most protected. And yet you hear stories, particularly from the Hong Kong Chinese who are in our universities, of how they're interfered with and quite often bullied. And that makes no sense at all. It's that equality and that I find really rubs me up the wrong way.
But you're not assuming, are you, that every student that's come here from China is in some way acting for the government? I think that would be a difficult route to go down as well. And one of the biggest areas of soft power for this country throughout the world is those that have been to British universities, which helps enormously. But perhaps there's more, I think, could be done in universities, from what you're saying, Scarlett, is integrating students, which I think is really important wherever they've come from. If students from any countries have been left to be in a group alone and not part of the university community, I think is a real problem. One of the things I think is really interesting about this and other things we've seen is how those who do have ill intent bide their time and seek to build up relationships. And I just think anybody who is in a position of influence in this country needs to be aware of that, and we need a greater awareness so people don't find themselves being caught in this way if somebody could be a spy.
It is a terrible thing, though, that if you're an 18, 19, 20-year-old at university and you listen to this debate and you're thinking, should I be suspicious of any Chinese student that I'm friendly with? I mean, it's a horrible way to think,
That's
isn't it?
why I made the comment I did. I think it is a horrible way to think. But then perhaps we ought to be looking at integrating our universities more. So foreign students, I remember my time as a student, we had a number of foreign students on our course, and they were hopefully integrated into our friendship groups and that. So they will go away back to their own countries and hopefully have a positive influence of the UK and want to work positively with us in the future.
But surely we also don't want excessive interference in the personal and private lives of students by university authorities and interference in people's past and political and personal views.
Sorry, what are you getting at?
Well, the question seemed to be saying, should we be monitoring, particularly in this case, Chinese students? Well, surely all students have the right to go to university and enjoy the opportunity to engage in free discussion and debate as part of their development, and we don't want mechanisms that interfere with that unnecessarily.
No, I suppose if any Chinese student, Russian student, whatever, gives any indication that they might be a spy, that has to be taken seriously, though, doesn't it?
I think.
I mean, I don't know how you identify one, but that's
exactly.
I'm sure there are people that do.
The risk is you just cast the net wide, isn't it? That's the risk with all of these.
I think the worry is we have these Confucius institutes, or at least we did, on campus, and they are capable of interfering with what campus affairs. And we have the United Front, which is a system organised by the Chinese Communist Party to keep an eye on students while they're here. So, of course, we shouldn't be suspicious of every Chinese student, and many of them, are seeking a better life here in the UK. But we have to be conscious that they are themselves monitored and supervised by people from their own embassies and state.
But the question was, how do universities screen students without it becoming persecution of those students who are coming here to study? And I think that's quite difficult for universities.
If only we had the universities minister here to look at that.
You might know who that is.
I might do. I was with her a couple of hours ago, Jackie Smith. Right, we will take more of your questions in just a few moments' time. 0345 6060 973. In fact, she was complaining that she hadn't been invited on this programme, so get ready for an appearance from the other Baroness Smith, the lesser Baroness
We have
Smith.
3 Baroness Smiths who are all ministers.
The shortest serving Baroness Smith. You're the longest serving, aren't you?
I'm the longest serving ever, I think.
It's 18 minutes past 8.
LBC.
'Tis the
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
19 minutes past 8. We have 2 peers of the realm with us, Angela Smith and James Bethell, Matt Wrack from the FBU, and Scarlett Maguire, the opinion pollster. Right, let's go to Martin in Doncaster. Hello, Martin.
Hello, Ian, and Merry Christmas to all for next week. Yeah, my question is,
Happy Christmas.
should Nigel Farage believe in Christian forgiveness at the person, that the lady will pull the milkshake at him.
Should Nigel Farage believe in Christian forgiveness and forgive the lady who threw a milkshake at him? Just a bit of background to this. Victoria Thomas Bowen was given a 13-week suspended prison sentence and 120 hours of community service today for throwing a milkshake over Nigel Farage when he was visiting Clacton during the election campaign. Farage says this is an example of two-tier justice. Angela.
I'm not sure what it means about two-tier justice, but I have to say...
Well, I think his point is that there were people in the riots who were sent to prison for sort of Facebook messages.
Well, it was a bit more than that, incitement to some horrible activities. But I don't have much Christian forgiveness, I have to say, from people who attack other people. I think if you're a politician and you're campaigning, and we want our politicians to be as accessible as possible, in doing so, you also make yourself vulnerable. And anyone who's been out on the campaign trail, you want to talk to as many people as you possibly can. You know, if you're asking people to vote for you, you've got to be seen by them and be there.
Not something you have to do anymore, of course, in the House of Lords.
No, I just did it for other people.
One of the perks of the job.
One of the perks, but I have to do it for other people. I enjoyed it for the people. But you're vulnerable in doing so. You know, you remember some years ago when John Prescott had a neg thrown at him. If something like that happens, you don't know what it is when it immediately happens. It's scary.
No, because all he felt was liquid running down his neck, so he thought that it was blood.
Yeah, he had no idea. And he just reacted.
Yeah.
But
in a way that only John Prescott could.
Yes.
Bless him.
And actually, if you think at the time, the people said, oh, that's terrible, but the public understood that if you feel vulnerable, then people lash out. And we don't want to get into that position. And I don't want politicians behind glass screens. We want to be out there. So I don't have much sympathy for the lady concerned. I think you should not be attacking politicians or anybody who's in public life who puts themselves out there and is talking to you and wants to be accessible.
Scarlett?
I completely agree with that, actually. And I do think there are some worrying trends that are visible. I mean, the British electoral study actually asked about this when it came to the last election, because they were worried about an increase in unpleasant incidents when MPs and their staffers were campaigning, especially in a few constituencies across the country. And they found some very worrying things in terms of demographics with age groups. So, for example, with 25 to 34-year-olds, I think a quarter of them thought it was acceptable to use foul language to accost a politician in the street. That compares to just 4% of the over 65s. And so if you're looking at that, where a quarter of young people think it's acceptable to do that, it is quite dramatic. And I worry about that.
Hasn't it? That's changed over time as well.
It's got worse.
It has.
Yeah.
I mean, I've just counted up. I think I campaigned in 5 general elections, and I can't remember a single incident where I felt unsafe or where somebody, now that may be because I'm 6'2" and sort of built like a proverbial, but I genuinely, I mean, you got the old person who might swear at you, but it was usually good nature. That's not... Now, James, you're going to disagree with me, aren't you?
Well, no, I broadly agree with the point, and I strongly agree with what Angela just said. But maybe I've been canvassing in tougher neighbourhoods than you. But I've definitely been chased down the street since an early age. I remember when I was 7 years old being chased around North Kensington. I remember Scottish football supporters climbing on the campaign bus when I was about 12 years old. And I remember being chased all around Tooting when I was battling against Sadiq Khan, and I remember anti-vax supporters demonstrating outside my house a few years ago, and it was deeply unpleasant. I completely agree with Angela. It has a very chilling effect on the democratic process, and I don't mind a little bit of rough and tumble, and you should be able to stand on your own 2 feet and what have you, but it really does demoralise and chill things, and it's too much to expect our politicians to put themselves out there if we're going to tolerate low-level violence like that.
I mean, I can remember we would happily send out sort of a couple of middle-aged ladies canvassing. You just wouldn't do that nowadays, would you, on their own? Matt?
I've always disliked dogs at the other side of people's doors when you're knocking on doors, actually. I've done a lot of election campaigning over the years. I think the most worrying times I've had dealing with fascist and far-right organisations, the BNP, the National Front in the past, generally I've not come across that. I think there's something possibly more on the question of behaviour and language. I think there's something going on in society where And I think social media has an influence where people believe they can get away with saying anything. So I was brought up on, I may swear to you over a pint possibly, but I was brought up, you don't do that in public life, you don't do that in trade union meetings, and you behave.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. That's how I was.
There's a formality about those meetings.
There's a formality and respect for the process in a trade union meeting in the tradition I was brought up in, and I think that to some degree is being lost. Equally, politics arouses passions, and I have fundamental disagreements with what I believe Nigel Farage's very divisive message that he has. I don't know what motivated the individual in this case, but if you put forward very divisive arguments, people are going to react, and that becomes part of the problem.
But do you think that sentence fits the crime?
I certainly don't agree with Farage's description of two-tier policing. I don't think you can compare that incident with the riots which put people's lives at risk.
You had a Conservative councillor's wife being sent to prison for, admittedly, a racist Facebook message. Now, I'm not defending the racist Facebook message, but, I mean, given that I think it was 6 months she got, where she actually had to go to prison, I mean, can you really sort of match the two here?
I think it's very strange for us to start. We were not in the court. We did not hear the evidence. And the whole point about justice is to hear the evidence in the individual case. I didn't hear the case in either of those examples that you've used. And it's impossible, therefore, to make a judgment on that.
Can I just pick up on this social media point, though? Because when I first became an MP, I remember on my first day arriving at Westminster, going down to the post office and picking up a sack full of letters and mail, which I dragged up the stairs. That doesn't happen anymore. And the art, if you're cross with somebody, that you have to write a letter, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it and post it, calms you down, I think. And I noticed a change.
Even if it is in green ink.
Even if it's in green ink, yeah, and there's a full moon. But there's a change when someone can email something that's immediate. And I took to at some point saying, do you realise how rude that was? And you got to get a sense of people who were just so angry and frustrated with something. They had to let off steam and let you know. You'd go back and they say, yeah, no, I'm so sorry, but I was so angry and upset. Can you help? And that's different to other people who just try and want to be rude. We used to pin those up on the wall, the people who mocked my accent and things like that, and just sort of...
Mocked your accent?
Yeah.
What's wrong with your accent?
Being a good Essex girl.
Oh, exactly.
Absolutely nothing wrong with my accent.
No.
But you would get people who would say, want to be offensive, but it was occasional.
But most of those people are not like that face-to-face.
Absolutely.
Right. When you speak to people face-to-face, people who are very angry on an email or a Twitter are very different if you speak to them, especially if you speak respectfully.
But it's because it's one step removed from people. Yes. You're not looking at people. And I think, we want politicians to be out there. The days of public meetings where you'd have 50 or 60 and somebody might heckle, and it was a bit of a joke. If somebody heckled, it was up to you to come back with a witty retort or deal with it. Now, I don't think as many politicians I'd want to put in front of a meeting as I used to do, of 50 or 100 people. It wouldn't be a particularly good thing to do these days. And I think that's really sad that we're seeing fewer of those kind of events and less of that kind of engagement.
So what can be done about it?
It's a tough one to call now. I think we can't wind the clock back. But I think there are various organisations trying, but perhaps it starts in schools, perhaps it's on access, perhaps we'd also have to just tone the temperature a little bit.
And listen to LBC a little bit more.
Yes, well, we're all nice to each other.
Exactly. Well, we are on this programme at any rate. Right. I think we'll go to a little bit of an early break. I hope the newsreader's ready because I want to get 2 questions in the next quarter. It's 29 minutes past 8. Let's get the news headlines, hopefully from Daryl Jackson.
A man accused of being a Chinese spy says he's done nothing wrong or unlawful and calls the Home Office claims ill-founded. Earlier, a court decided to lift an anonymity order for Yang Tengbo, who was said to be at one point a close confidant of Prince Andrew. 3 people, including a suspected shooter, have died and several are injured after a shooting at a school in Wisconsin. Officers say they found multiple victims with gunshot wounds when they arrived at the campus in Madison. And the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has lost a confidence vote, putting the country on course for an election in February. He'd been governing as a head of a 3-party coalition until it collapsed last month after he sacked his finance minister. LBC weather: rain lingering in North Scotland tonight, also moving into Northern Ireland, a low of 1 degree.
This is LBC.
Oi! Calling
with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:32, we have with us on the panel for Cross Question Baroness Angela Smith for Labour, Lord James Bethell for the Conservatives, Matt Wrack, General Secretary of the Fire Brigades Union, and Scarlett Maguire from the opinion polling firm JL Partners. Now, answer me this, because we only ever hear about opinion polling companies when there's an election on.
Yeah.
But of course, it's actually a minute percentage of your income doing political opinion polling, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, or if any, especially doing election polling, that really is, it's more of a sort of parlour game. It's obviously a lot of fun, and when it goes well, you'll take a lot of credit for it, obviously, as we just had over the last few months. But no, it's a very, very tiny amount of what we do. It's what you see a lot in the public domain, but we do a whole host of other things. It's just sort of the icing on the cake.
And you do a lot of polling in America as well.
Awful lot of polling in America.
How different is it there to here?
Well, it's incredibly different. Yeah, it's incredibly different. I think there are some lessons that you can learn between the two, but the politics there are pretty different, and the polling industry there is very different, and the people themselves are harder to poll, it's harder to reach, it's harder to get a more representative sample, and it's a funny place, and it's I don't know, but I thought that's why it was quite interesting when we came. We're relatively new there. We've only been up and running a couple of years, and we sort of beat all the American pollsters to it. But that's actually because if you're looking here from a British perspective, some of the way they do things and their industry can look quite backwards. But it's not many things I think you can make that comparison to where it feels like the US are behind us. But polling, I think, is one of those things.
Okay, right. Let's go to a text question from Cliff in Bishop Stortford. Given the salience to the public of illegal migration and the rising number of arrivals, how long can Labour maintain their current line of refusing to specify milestones for progress? Angela, I have to start with you again.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's an issue about specifying milestones. Or
is it foundations?
No, the foundations underpin the milestones.
Oh, right, okay.
It's keep up, Ian, keep up. But it is about showing you can do something about this. Now, one of the things I think is pretty awful, this whole issue about the small boats coming across is underpinned by criminal gangs, international criminal gangs, making a fortune out of preying on people who are vulnerable. And there is no circumstance in which people putting their life at risk in small boats is good. So looking at what's happened at the moment, and I think some of the work Yvette's doing, particularly travelling to other countries, looking at how we act internationally on this is really important, dealing with the gangs, and actually returning people quickly if they're not entitled to be here. One of the great fictions of the Rwanda policy was it cost, I've lost track of how many hundreds of £1 million it was now.
I think Labour accused was saying 700 million.
700 million? It was just ridiculous money. And I think there were more journalists and more Home Secretaries that visited Rwanda than people who had their claims assessed. And it's just not the way to do things. So you have to actually have a proper policy and not just rhetoric on this.
But why was it that when Keir Starmer made his speech about milestones and foundations or whatever, immigration wasn't mentioned? Because surely the government is going to be judged by the fact whether this time next year they can say, well, in 2025, the number of people coming across the Channel has gone down by 25%, or whether it's gone up again. I mean, partly, you will be judged by that, won't you?
But you'll also be judged on security, you're judged on the economy, and that's an underpinning of everything. National security, it was actually on the foundations, it was quite clear on that. It's a fundamental part of dealing with security and border security as well. So it's there. And you'll see progress already. More people are having their claims assessed. More people are being returned.
But more people are coming over. That's the problem.
Yeah, and that's why it's got to be tackled at source. It's not just talking, saying, "Oh, we'll send you to Rwanda if you come over illegally." It had no impact whatsoever. You have to do something, and also to where you've got places of conflict in the world. That's when you start to get people leaving, where you have people looking for a better life because of the poverty in the area. That's when you have people leaving. So for those reasons, that's why it has to be international action, and we have to look to do what we can to work with other countries to have security across the world.
Matt Wrack.
I think one of the great challenges of modern politics is how we have a civilised, humane debate on migration and on the issue of refugees. And unfortunately, I think that's very, very difficult. I think in the case of crossings of the Channel, for example, the issue arises for me about how people can identify safe routes if they have a desire to come to the UK, safe routes whereby their applications can be processed safely, for example, in another country. And we haven't achieved that. I think we also have to look at why people migrate and why we have refugees, because let's be clear, most of those cases, when they go through process, are identified that they have the right to remain here. So there's a bit of a false narrative about the scale of this problem
But you accept that whether it was the previous government or this government, they will in part be judged by their success in reducing. They're never going to eliminate the number of people coming across, but they can
have a
reduce
responsibility to try to make the case for a calm, rational, civilised debate on the issue. And I think one of the things of recent years is that is not being done. We also have to look at as I mentioned the point, why do people migrate? Why do we have refugees? We have refugees because of wars. And we have to look at the role of British foreign policy in some of those wars. We have refugees because of extreme incidents of climate change, which are going to get worse. And those challenges are going to get worse for the whole of the world. And unless there is international cooperation on some of those other issues, then we will simply face crisis after crisis after crisis.
James Bethell.
Well, I thought Matt put that with great humanity and thoughtfulness, and the issue of refugees, I agree with him completely. My concern for the next election, though, is the legal migration, which is running at a very, very high level, and a lot of the voters are clearly deeply concerned about that.
Did you say legal or illegal?
Legal. And it puts huge pressure on our public services, and our schools and hospitals are definitely straining underneath that, both in terms of cost and sheer capacity. And people are puzzled. Why have we got an underlying health issue in this country with 1 million people dropping out of the workforce? Why are our children not being taught the skills they need in order to get competitive jobs? Why do we need this immigration, this legal immigration, in order to provide the social care workers to look after our vulnerable and our aged people? That makes no sense to people, and they have a sense of unfairness about it. That's going to put a lot of pressure on mainstream politicians come the next election. I know that because that's what's happening in every other country around the place. And if that's not tackled by the Prime Minister, then it's going to deteriorate, and the conversation in this country is going to become really, really bitter and aggravated.
Scarlett?
I have no doubt that Labour will at least partly be judged on their record on both illegal and legal migration by the end of this time in Parliament. I think they're already partly being judged on it now, and it's not unique to England. I was very struck by the fact that the CDU in Germany were at least discussing the idea about Germany withdrawing themselves from the ECHR. You know, that's a discussion that has been happening in parts of our politics in this country, but very striking that was coming from the centre-right governing party in Germany. We've seen the German government collapse today. We've seen France politics in turmoil, and that we know there's been this big anti-incumbency drive across the West. That is absolutely true. But I think when you look at the factors that are behind that, part of that is a frustration from the heart of the public with the immigration system they don't think is working for them. And you see that not just in this country, but as I said, in many countries around the world. And I did think it was odd. You know, I did think it was odd when I was watching Keir Starmer's milestones, not which I keep going, but milestones, that he did not mention immigration there. I know they were part of the missions, and I think maybe the foundations, I can't quite remember, but the foundations as well, great. But but I did think it was odd, just because we do know how much of a priority it is for voters, at least to talk about the solution. So we know that, I think, you know, this government's going to be judged on the economy, public services, and its record on immigration. And so to have that omitted, I do think it was a bit odd.
But you've already got the Secure Borders Agency set up, so things are being done to do it properly. I think the problem has been it's been an issue about rhetoric rather than sort of concrete action and sensible action. If you ask people what they think the level of immigration is, the figure they'll give you is far, far higher than what it actually is. So people's perceptions are actually that it's far, far greater number of people coming to the country illegally than actually are. It's quite an interesting figure.
I think that was the case. I'm not sure it is any longer. When you look at the actual amount of net immigration over the last 12 months, I mean, it's
that's net immigration, but I'm talking about the illegal.
Even those of us who are wet as a lettuce on immigration think that's a fairly astonishing figure.
The only thing I'll say to that as well is that I think people's perceptions do matter. So I definitely think there is an argument about toning down rhetoric in certain parts and everything, but people's perceptions really do matter. So no matter what they think the number is, that you have people coming to you saying, I don't think this is working for me in my community for X, Y, Z reasons, and that perception matters, even if they're wrong about the number.
On the economic drivers question James raised, if in certain parts of the economy, adult social care, for example, there is a need to recruit large numbers of people from overseas, then the question has to arise as, first of all, those people are making a huge contribution to our economy and to looking after people who need looking after. But secondly, why is it that there are gaps in the labour force here? Yeah. And one of the biggest gaps is because of low pay. Yeah. And actually we need to address the social care crisis in this country with investments and turn it into a decent, well-paid job for people.
I agree. There's a sense of unfairness about this. Why is it that we have to run these professions at such a low cost that...
Well, you were a health minister, you tell us.
I think it was a mistake. I know, I agree. Well, I saw it for myself. I also saw the consequences of running it very, very cheaply, which is that people ended up in hospital too often. And if we'd invested more in social care, which is phenomenally expensive, and the sums of money involved, bumping up the pay of our 1.5 million social care workers cost billions and billions of pounds. And things are quite tight at the moment. But my goodness, it would relieve the pressure on the NHS a huge amount if more work could be done, more clinical work could be done in a care setting rather than in a hospital setting.
Well, that's what politics is supposed to be about, isn't it? About identifying priorities and then identifying solutions to deal with those priorities that people have identified.
For sure.
But that's the problem, isn't it? Particularly in the healthcare system, where you can argue that everything is a priority, and that doesn't really work when you're talking about priorities. Mental health is a priority, social care is a priority, cancer care is a priority. Each of those, you can argue, deserves hundreds of millions, if not billions more. And in the end, Angela, that must be the biggest frustration for you when you're not health secretary, but you're in the cabinet looking at sort of how the money's divided up. You can't meet all of these demands.
No, and it's worse than we'd anticipated, and the 22 billion pounds black hole comes with a mantra.
People are getting really bored with that.
I know, but actually if you're dealing with the consequences of it day by day, it's pretty dramatic. And you look at all those things you've mentioned, but when you had things like the Horizon scandal, the infected blood scandal, those people were promised rightly compensation, but no money was ever put aside for it, so that has to be found as well. So all those issues you mentioned, I think, are crucial. And if we can get people back to work, then the health of the nation is really important. There's so many people who aren't working because of physical and mental health issues. So it's an economic issue. If you're talking about getting people out of hospital, social care is absolutely... I had a case recently with a family member who couldn't be released from hospital for 3 or 4 days, which is mine in that case, because he wouldn't be able to look after themselves at home and had to have social care to a high level for a few weeks. But that had to be arranged, and so that was a delay before that could be done. So all these issues, health and the economy and social care, are all very much interlinked. They are very expensive. If we don't find a way of addressing them for the longer term, then we're going to have this spiral again. And that's not just about, immigration isn't the key issue there. It's low wages for people working in the care sector. And I have to say, so the work they do is what most people wouldn't want to do. We look for other people to look after our elderly and our infirm.
Right, we will move on to some other subjects in just a moment here on LBC. It's 8:45.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
Angela Smith, James Bethell, Matt Wrack and Scarlett Maguire are here taking your questions. Wesley in Gravesend says, what is the significance of Israel closing down its embassy in the Republic of Ireland? Now, the Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar said the decision was prompted by the Irish government's, quotes, extreme anti-Israeli policies. The Taoiseach Simon Harris has hit back, calling this move the diplomacy of distraction, and Israel will not silence Ireland. Now, of course, we should remember that Israel supported South Africa's case to the ICC it was basically accusing Israel of genocide. I think that was the case where they supported South Africa. James Bethell.
I am extremely worried about this, taking the Israel hierarchy to courts for things for fighting a war.
Well, let's not go into the detail of that, but this particular closing down their embassy in Ireland.
Well,
what's the significance?
Keeping embassies open is just absolute cardinal priority for keeping dialogue going. So I'm really worried and concerned about it. When it's happened to the UK before, it's led to a huge deterioration in our relations with the countries concerned, and it always leads to trouble.
So is this just a political gesture from Israel?
Yeah, sure. But it's something that I hugely regret. They should be trying to keep the dialogue going.
Scarlett?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it feels like it is a very dramatic response. Obviously, they would say they were justified in doing so, but I do think it speaks to a wider problem that Israel have, which is their reputation abroad. And I think this is mystifying to quite a lot of people as to why it is quite so bad. We can talk about it, but something we've been noticing as we've tracked it is that their reputation in Western European countries has been really bad, and surprisingly so in some ways. And I think that's been a chronic problem that's gone partly under the radar for decades, and now is coming home to roost, where you have these different governments who are feeling pressure from their electorates on certain issues. Like, we're now in a position where people are more likely in this country to feel sympathy with Palestine than they are for Israel. That was not the case 18 months ago. And so I think it's just quite an interesting point and note in this changing relationship between Israel and Western countries. And again, even if it's not reached other embassies, other governments yet, the fact is it's there in public opinion. And I think that is something that Israel will need to at least think about, and think about what their way forward from here.
Matt?
I don't think it's surprising at all that there is growing sympathy for the Palestinian people in the face of the horrendous onslaught that they've faced from the Israeli war against Gaza and increasingly against people in the West Bank. I think that demonstrates the basic humanity of many people across the world, particularly among young people. And yes, I think it's true that attitudes to Israel have changed sharply as a result of that. I think the move by the Israelis to remove their embassy in the Republic of Ireland is frankly an attempt to bully and intimidate people from making criticisms of their policies, and those policies are entirely valid for criticism.
Angela?
It almost goes back to the first question, doesn't it, about China? What do you do when you disagree? Do you engage or not? And I would have thought it would be helpful for Israel to keep their embassy in Ireland and engage rather than withdraw. And it's a matter for the countries involved. But I don't see what Israel gains from not having their embassy in Ireland.
Right, let's move on to Stephen in East Grinstead, who says, I love this. Will Royal Mail deliver better customer service now a cheque is in the post? Get it? Now, the government has approved the £5.3 billion sale of Royal Mail to the EP Group, owned by the Czech billionaire Daniel Kretinsky. Royal Mail's universal service obligation to deliver to every address across the UK 6 days a week at a standard price will be maintained as part of the deal, say the government. Now, obviously, Mr. Kretinsky is a wonderful man, since he owns 27% of West Ham United. Angela?
I think this is really interesting. The Royal Mail has been deteriorating for some time now, and I think if you worked in the Royal Mail or you're a customer of the Royal Mail, you've been really concerned what's going on. I don't know when I last had a daily post or things haven't arrived late. I think this is different when we saw the privatisation previously. The government has a golden share. They've worked with the trade unions and the workers and the workforce there to sort of protect them. and there are certain conditions that it can't be taken out of the country as well. So a number of issues there that Johnny Reynolds, as Business Secretary, has baked into the agreement. So, I want to be optimistic about this and think it could really work. It could make a difference. I hope so. But I just think I would give the question of the day to Stephen from East Grinstead.
I think we can all agree on that. Matt Wrack, how your colleagues in the CWU, what have they... I don't know if you followed what they've been saying.
I have followed what they do, obviously. So my colleagues in the Communication Workers Union, I think their starting point would be the same as mine, which is Royal Mail should be in public ownership and in public hands. And I think that's the view of the vast majority of people across the country. And it is what we see is partially, at least, a result of the failure of privatisation. However, they've got to deal with the situation they face, and I believe they have had meetings with the new owners with guarantees about protecting service levels and some of the industrial relations which has been badly damaged in the past few years. So I think there is some positive on that front, but it doesn't address the fundamental problem that's about the failed privatisation of Royal Mail.
Well, believe it or not, Matt, I'm quite close to the CWU, and I think your description of their position is 100% accurate. James?
The Royal Mail does play a social role. It's part of our national resilience, and it gets into parts of our community that other bits of private enterprise don't. But I am optimistic that some entrepreneurialism might yet lead to some revival. I mean, Royal Mail is due a revival. It's sort of like the vinyl of delivery mechanisms. And I very nearly bought a vinyl factory and regret that I didn't, because it's now booming, yes. A friend of mine bought it instead when I was at Miniature Sound. And maybe the Royal Mail can be like that, and its time is back again.
Scarlett?
Yeah, I hope it does do better. It's been pretty shocking. It's pretty shocking. I mean, I really don't rely on it very much. I hope it is improved. I think you're right, though, about Matt's point about the public wanting it to be in public ownership. They're not particularly thrilled, I think, that things like that do become privatised, especially when that becomes botched. But we'll see if this manages to persuade them otherwise.
And I suppose we should remember it was Ed Davey and Vince Cable who privatised it, wasn't it? It was, people always think of privatisation. It was Conservatives. Okay, it was a Conservative Lib Dem coalition, but it was the Lib Dem. It was the Lib Dems. What did it? We have a Lib Dem MP on the programme tomorrow.
Under Tory leadership.
Yeah, but I think it was actually their initiative. Maybe my memory doesn't serve me correctly, but I think it does.
I think most people this Christmas, though, will go and buy their stamps for their Christmas cards and get a bit of a shock.
Or if they're like me, they won't be buying any stamps at all because they haven't bought any Christmas cards. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not paying £1.65 to send a Christmas card. Not even to you, Angela.
Well, shall I still want yours?
They're not a penny anymore.
No, but it's great, isn't it? When people get a letter, getting an email is one thing, but getting a letter through the post, there's still something special about it.
Yeah, but as Corey's pointing out, £6.50 odd for 8 second-class stamps.
Oh my God, that's
it's a complete... I mean, who's going to do that? Who in their right mind will do that?
We paid our children £1 a letter to do local deliveries, and it saved us a fortune.
Run that by me again?
Well, we paid them £1.
Quite a lot. Your children?
Yeah, my own children.
£1 each letter?
Yeah. And they did about
cheaper
25.
To
they did about 25 of the letters because they were all living in our neighbourhood.
That's child labour.
Well, that's a good thing. That's teaching them a good entrepreneurial example.
You want to speak to the CWU about
that. That's the viral clip, ladies and gentlemen.
They're going to be in touch with the CWU.
Now, a follow-up question from Robbie in Chelmsford. Does Britain selling off Royal Mail to a foreign billionaire provide further evidence of short-term thinking by the British government, Angela Smith?
Well, here's the problem you deal with where you are, and it was privatised, as you've just said, by the coalition government and the Lib Dems. So where we are now, we haven't got the best service British people. So we will make the best of it. And the truth will be in what happens next. And I think the conditions placed on this, because are really, really important. And that's, we weren't dealing with something that was in public ownership already. The conditions in this are really important, and the government having a golden share, I think, makes a difference.
And the other thing to say is, all joking aside, Daniel Kretinsky is no fool, and he's not an asset stripper, which I think there were people in for the Royal Mail who probably would have been asset strippers. He's got a record of running very successful businesses. He owns 10% of Sainsbury's. So if anybody from abroad was going to buy it, and he's invested all this money in West Ham, hasn't interfered at all. So as you say, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. Anybody want to come in on that sort of foreign ownership of
I think
assets like this?
it sums up the failure of 4 decades of the privatisation policy that followed the 1979 general election, and I think we should wake up to that. I don't think we want key public services to be dominated by the profit motive.
And that's why we're seeing moving in so many of the railways back into public ownership, and that's about service for the public.
Right, should we move on to our fun question? Because I know you've all been looking forward to this. It's from Suzanne in Leeds. A survey by the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra says Last Christmas by Wham is Britain's favourite festive song. Fairy Tale of New York by the Pogues was second. Is that the one with Kirsty MacColl in it?
Yes.
And Wizards, I Wish It Could Be Christmas Every Day came third. What is your number one? Scarlett?
Can I say Hark the Herald Angels Sing? I know it's a carol. Sorry.
If you want to.
But otherwise it's
quite
the Pogues one,
traditional.
obviously. I know, I love it, but I love the descant. So it's,
Matt?
I love the Pogues, but I think that song's overdone myself. I've got a Christmas playlist on Spotify, and actually, bizarrely, Greg Lake, I Believe in Father Christmas.
Oh.
James?
Well, I had back-to-back Elvis over Christmas. The rest of my family hate it, and they all complain
There's a
about
new
it a lot.
album out. Do you know this? It's new Elvis Christmas album.
Oh, I'm going to look for that.
A new Elvis album?
Well, I know this.
Is it on vinyl?
Shall I tell you how I know? Well, they just rehash it all, don't they, and put them in different order. But I'm married to an Elvis fan, if he's listening. It's our wedding anniversary today, and I bought him the new Elvis Christmas album.
Oh, bless you.
But I'm not going for Elvis. I still love White Christmas. I just think there's
Elvis
something
White
about
Christmas?
that. No, I'm going to go for the original. And I'm still driving home for Christmas as well, because that's what I'll do on Thursday night.
And, of course, driving home for Christmas, on Christmas Day, between 10 and 1, you can listen to me on LBC while you're preparing your Christmas lunch.
There we go.
You're not commenting, Angela, on that?
No,
prospect.
I'm just thinking. Don't
She's
be
playing my
distracted.
Spotify.
No, I will listen to you.
I can't believe that none of you have chosen a Cliff Richard one. I mean, what's Christmas without Cliff?
It's all Tone and Wine.
No, I don't like that one.
You don't know?
No, he
What
does a
one?
brilliant version of O Little Town of Bethlehem, which is an entirely different tune to what we would normally sing.
You're a traditionalist,
church.
though, aren't you?
Yeah, and Saviour's Day, how can you forget that?
Yeah. There's lots of great Christmas music, isn't
There
there?
is.
Good fun.
No, it's true. And do we have a smooth Christmas station on Global? Heart Christmas it's this year. Heart Christmas. You can listen to... You'd love this, Matt. It's Christmas songs 24 hours a day.
Brilliant.
What could be wrong?
ask for?
Mind you, I don't want to sort of persuade people
Iain
to listen to
Dale
that
Yeah.
rather than
I want
LBC.
Matt's Spotify playlist.
Right. Thank you all very much for coming in today. Tomorrow's panel includes the Lib Dem Health spokesperson, Helen Morgan, the Alba Party General Secretary, Chris McElhenney, and the political commentator, Lynn May. Coming up in the next hour, though, we're going to talk about smacking because the Children's Wellbeing Bill is going through Parliament at the moment. But the government have decided not to include a provision to ban smacking, which has outraged quite a lot of people. I'm wondering whether you think they've made a mistake here because smacking is banned in Scotland, it's banned in Wales, but not in England. Should it be? Simple question, yes or no. Actually, I prefer you not to ring in and just say yes or no because we won't have a very interesting phone in if you do that. So if you could explain why you think smacking should be banned or why you think there's actually no reason and existing laws can cover it just as well. That's what the government clearly thinks. Do you? 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, an alleged Chinese spy insists he's done nothing wrong after being named by the High Court. Yang Tengbo has been banned from the UK after forming close ties with Prince Andrew. He denies spying for Beijing. Security Minister Dan Jarvis has told MPs the government will always act swiftly when the UK is put at risk.
Mr. Speaker, where there are individuals who pose a threat to our national security, we are absolutely committed to using the full range of powers available to disrupt them.
At least 3 people are dead and 7 wounded after a shooting at a school in the US state of Wisconsin. It's believed the shooter was a student at the Christian school in Madison. A man's been arrested on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving after a 2-year-old died in a suspected hit-and-run involving a stolen car. 4 adults were also injured in Smethwick near Birmingham on Saturday night. Lawyers for Lucy Letby are seeking a review of her convictions after claiming an expert witness changed his mind. The former nurse is serving a whole life sentence for the murder of 7 babies and trying to kill 7 others. LBC's Charlotte Lynch has been at a press conference held by her legal team.
What the defence hope